too much that there's an old art or a new art. The art is one, the art is either good or not worth in a way, you know that. So that the old art becomes new and new, and our scholars usually are doing this all the time just to prove that it is right. This year there are over 60 participants, and from I believe from 9 countries. I'm not going to tell them all the countries. Of course, you can see it, and some of you know each other. But it is nice to be together, this our milieu, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and international in the same time. And usually our conference is fixed on certain topic. And this year, our topic is very, very interesting and very, how to say, topical. It is art and archives. Everyone from us has spent a lot of hours in the archives, so you know what it means to work with archive. And here I want to remind you that all of us are inflamed by the archive fever, as Jacques Derrida said in the 90s. So we are poisoned people in a way, but we are healing each other by knowledge, by peeking into the archives, by taking off the dust and giving up to life and to memory our past and our history for the future. So today it's a very important, this meeting between people who are detectives, who are discoveries, to share what they have found out, really found in a literary way. So I wish very, very fruitful work on this forum to every one of you. I wish really to make a big cluster of scholars, international clusters, who are poisoned or infected by fever, but they're just living with this fever. So good luck, and a very nice forum, very nice 3 days. We have a very good program, I believe, so it will be very interesting for you. And now I'll give the floor to the organizers. Thank you very much for the no speaker, for the participants. Thank you, organizers. They have done a lot of work. And now, please, the organizers, one of the organizers, Margarita Koyonjeva, to tell you some details, how we shall provide this forum, and some logistics and so forth. I think that you're interested in this practical text. So, thank
you. Dear colleagues, once again, a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. Excuse me, but I will write just to fit in within the time frame. I will begin with a description of what is depicted on the banner outside and on the booklet with the conference program. In the process of preparing the materials of the forum, we came across 2 photographs from the 1930s, which are kept in the archives of the Institute in a fund of the Mavrodinov's family, a famous family of Bulgarian art historians. The first photo captures a moment of the work of a group of scientists in the Ivanovo rock churches. This is a monument with medieval frescoes, included in the UNESCO list, and today museum complex at the Historical Museum Ruse. The other photo captures a moment of them gathered around an improvised table nearby. The people in the photos were identified by my colleague Maya Zakharieva. Among them are the Bulgarian scientists Nikola Mavrodinov, Vera Ivanova Mavrodinova, the photographer Dimitar Katsev, and Gabriel Mie and his wife Sophie Mie. The photographs were most likely taken in 1934 when Mie was in Bulgaria for the 4th Congress of Byzantine Studies, September 1934, and the field expedition to the Ivanovo Rock churches was organized. The two photographs have not been published so far, and they are actually contact copies of glass plate photos whose location is currently unknown. Fortunately, these contact copies survived, and we have them thanks to the Mavrodinov Family Fund. Further research on their origin lies ahead of us. Here, it is also worth mentioning that the Institute's archive is a separate department within our scientific institution, founded in the mid-50s of the last century. Today, it preserves plentiful photo, textual, audio, video archives, and continues to house private funds of Bulgarian scientists passed down by heirs. In some cases, the archive entries were particularly saved by colleagues, as actually is the case with the Mavrodinov Fund. Now a short remark on the chosen topic for the conference. It was actually an idea of my colleague Iva Doseva, who managed not only to participate here, but also to edit a special issue of the Art Studies Quarterly, dedicated to the same subject. You can see it here, but it's still not out of press, so we are awaiting for it. But on our shelves, some of the previous issues of our periodicals are there, and you can obtain them for free. That was for the archive photos and the theme, and now I will engage your attention with a brief practical information about the conference. This year, the organizers Maya Zakharieva, Darina Boykin, and Teresa Bacheva worked in collaboration with several museums located in the Sofia city center. Therefore, up to April 6th, our colleagues from abroad can visit the National Archaeological Museum, the National Art Gallery and its branches, including the Museum of Christian Art, the National Ethnographic Museum, the Regional History Museum of Sofia, and there is an option for a guided tour on April 4th in the St. Sophia Basilica archaeological level. In case you intend to visit the museums, please keep in mind that you must show your conference badge or legitimize yourself as a participant to have free access. At the entrances of the museums, we deposit lists with your names, and there should be no problem with the entrance. For the guided tour tomorrow, please contact the organizers in advance. Should you need technical or logical assistance during the conference, you may refer to our support queue. You will distinguish them by the red inscriptions in their badges. And once again, on behalf of the organizers, I wish all of you a successful conference, a pleasant stay here, and it is an honor now and my distinct pleasure to give the floor to Professor Nenad Makulevic from the Belgrade University to open the scientific part of our forum with his lecture entitled Archives and the Methodology of Art History. Please, Professor Makulevic, the floor is yours.
25 minutes. Dear colleagues, dear friends, first of all, I want to thank organizers for the organizing of this really unique and very important conference and inviting me to participate in. The topic of my lectures is archives and the methodology of art history. In general, I want just to put some ideas or some comments, not to give any big conclusion or to say this is this and that, because I think this topic is very important and there are so many differences and from country to country, from situation to situation, but I think that we can also start talking about the methodology when we start talking about archives. From the beginnings of modern art history, so-called, the use of archives has been an integral part of research work. From Vasari, we all know, to the present day, archival sources have served to construct artists' biographies and establish the chronology of artworks. The need for archival material has occasionally led to its collection and publication, to a much lesser extent than, for example, in historical science. Within Serbian art history, for example, one is a multi-volume edition, Classicism kod Srba. It's from 1966 to 1967, where we have two books, for example, dedicated to archival material on painting, on architecture, and one book about the press sources for press. But it is important to know that although the significance of archival material is old, and we all know about that, the education of art historians does not prepare them or us for its critical reading and potential use. Unlike historians, I know that here are some colleagues are art historians, some historians, but who are aware that archival documents can be inaccurate, falsified, and certainly the subject of verification. We don't have nothing similar in our art historical programs. And that is a really huge problem, especially later, but that is one note. The way archival material has been used has been always close tied to the dominant methods in art history. It is absolutely connected. For example, within stylistic analysis and iconographic studies, archival material played a secondary role. However, archives gained greater importance with the transformations in the late 1980s and the so-called new art history. I speak in general in Europe, when contextuality became one of the key elements. Today, the significance of archives is particularly embraced by contemporary artists and architects who create their own archives and then give them to the certain institution for preservation as a foundation for studying their work. Also, it is important, modern digitization practices have also strongly impacted archival materials. Numerous archival documents are being digitized, making them accessible to a wider audience while simultaneously preserving the original records. For example, now, if you start to research something that is obviously not from Serbia, but from Europe, from Vienna, it's incredible. There's so many archival materials now online that we cannot deal with it so easy. So, as previously mentioned, the relationship between art historical research methodology and the use of archival material characterizes the modern contextual approach, actually. Contemporary art history is a humanities discipline focused on studying of all aspects of visuality. We don't speak anymore about art history in the sense of the beginning of the 1900s. That is something what is very nice. We deal only with very nice pictures. Renaissance is the peak of the whole culture in the world, especially not we here. We're coming, most of us are dealing with the Balkans material. So its task of art history, like that of all sciences, is the discovery of the truth. That is the sense. Without that, that is not science. It's very, very simple. and its historical component of art history, the integral part of our discipline is the history, it's art history. It's not theory of art, it's not philosophy of the art, it's not this or that, it's history. So if we perceive that it's historical science, then it's necessary to use archival sources. It's very, very simple. So determining the historical and contextual dimensions in the study of this visual practice or art practice cannot be reduced to merely listing information about, just when you see context, we have about political realities, rulers, and major events. In many books we have, when that started with contextuality, that means in the, 1800s, the empire was that and that. That's not enough. That don't mean that we really understand context. Rather, among other things, it should aid in understanding the historical significance of concepts, terms, and characteristics of historical process in which a particular artistic practice emerged. Context doesn't mean just huge, wide context. Context is also something that is characteristic for the moment. And then we have to understand. We know all that, the terms are moving and so on to the time. I will using the example of the Serbian and Balkan early modern, the sacred visual culture, I will just demonstrate how to use of archival material contributes to the development of scholarly knowledge and fundamental methodological frameworks in art history. So I want just to put a few examples of how archival material actually changed some points in the art historical research. And of course, I would like much more to discuss maybe some topics. So first, terminology. In any scholarly work, specialized terminology holds one of the most crucial points, positions. Within contemporary studies that also have a historical dimension, terms are not merely external labels, some kind of stickers or tags to help us grasp the subject, but must also have clear historical definitions and interpretations. It is well known that identical concepts, identical terms, in the sense of the words, can bear differing meaning across the time and space. When we say one term, that doesn't mean that is absolutely same like the use of the term in our country 100 years ago or in other country at this time. So making the determination of their historical significance essential for understanding ideas, events, and spatial contexts. Similarly, the complete iconological meaning of an image cannot be understood without appropriated sources. I here can only add that, for example, also if you read Erwin Panofsky, iconology, in the end he also put a note. Iconology means to understand the work of art in the context. Although we just mixing usually iconography and iconology. So, one example that demonstrates how problematic analysis can arise without archival sources is the iconographical interpretation of this composition in the center of the iconosis. You all see and you know. It has different names. Holy Trinity, Coronation of the Virgin, Holy Trinity with the Coronation of the Virgin. This composition appears on iconostasis from the territory, I am speaking about Serbian case, I'm not speaking about any other, from the territory of the Karlovci Metropolitanate from the mid of the 18th century onwards, also in the 19th century. And by the 19th century, it spreads also to the Balkan zoograph, iconostasis, and traditions. Although it is widely known that the inscription hold an important and obligatory place in Orthodox iconography, researchers, older researchers, based their interpretation solely on iconographic similarity, labeling it the Coronation of the Virgin, and attributing to the influence of Catholic iconography and the cult of the Immaculate Virgin. In our case, that was Radmila Mihajlović especially. In his 1996 book, Serbian Baroque Painting, very well known to, I suppose, to most of you, Miroslav Timotijević devoted significant attention to a so-called Mariological interpretation of this composition. However, painting contracts, all contracts we have, all documents, archival documents, refer to this composition as the Holy Trinity. So you cannot find in the 18th or the 19th century, in Serbia case, any other archival documents we have contract, what to paint, how to paint, that this composition is Coronation of the Virgin. Nowhere. It's always Holy Trinity. And I know that Professor Timotievich was really, let's say, obsessed with this, because that was one of the main topics of the whole Baroque iconography, of the understanding of the iconostasy. Everything is around that. And he was talking, I have a problem with the archive. In archive, we all see that this iconography similarity is same as Coronation of the Virgin, but in the archive is only Holy Trinity, nothing else. What is? And based on these archival sources and this iconographic content, Professor Timotievich soon corrected his stance. Just 4 years later, in 2000, he published a new text renaming the composition the Holy Trinity with the Coronation of Virgin. And the difference in iconological interpretation between Timotievich in 1996 and 2000, and that is very, our manuscripts are substantial and far-reaching, and that is very interesting that actually he published the other text in one very, I will call, not small, but it is small journal, provincial journal, Zbornik Muzeja Srema, so no one can find that journal at all. But actually he didn't publish in some kind of main Serbian art historical journals, because he changed. If you read that, this part from 1996 and this paper 4 years later, you will see this changing in the concepts, you know. So emphasizing, for example, the Coronation of the Virgin was evidence of the presence and influence of Roman Catholic doctrine. And that, of course, was very important for us, because earlier scholars started with writing like that. The result of that writing is that we have all Serbian Orthodox Church against in the war against the iconostasis. They don't go deep. They say, no, it's Catholic, we have to destroy it. That's Catholic, we have to destroy it. That is the result of the researchers. Before that, in the 1900s, nobody talked about that in that way. If you have description, they say, we have iconostasis like in Kiev, it's Orthodox. No one is talking, it's Catholic. Today, if you ask, everyone will tell you that is Catholic and that it should be destroyed. So, but on the other side, if you speak about the, as he analyzed the Holy Trinity with the Coronation of the Virgin, he aligned with Orthodox interpretations, particularly those popularized in Kievan theology, not only in Kievan theology. In my opinion, just to be fair, to say something about that, even the title Holy Trinity with the Coronation of the Virgin remains inadequate, as it represents a sort of compromise. Such a name, for example, would imply two separate composition, Holy Trinity and Coronation of Virgin. So we have, but we don't have that here, merged in one. So I think that question is still open, and we should actually much more go deeper in the archive sources and understand why are they calling that only Holy Trinity. Maybe it's also it's a compromise to call it Holy Trinity with Virgin. I don't know. But we can see this example from iconographic studies. There are other similar problems concerning the use of specific iconographic terms when sources and inscriptions suggest different interpretations. There are many of them. I will just note one of the most common that I had in practice, an example, and that is for me confusing, particularly when I was writing, is the distinction between theophany, bogojavljenje, and the baptism of Christ, krštenje Hristovo. In the contrast, there is theophany. On the icon sometimes is bogojavljenje, and art historical are already writing krštenje, baptism. And the meaning is different. If you read what is the theophany as a big historical dogmatic event and so on, I think most of you understand that, is one point. To put on the historical element of the Jesus' life is other point. And we have, we have in the archive one solution, but we are always going, a little bit blind, finding iconographic similarities, and especially earlier it was very popular according to the models from the Western Europe practice. One of the major issues in art historical writings relates also to precise descriptions and terminology concerning the visual aspects of the artworks. In analysis of Zograf painting, numerous sources are often overlooked. Illuminated painting manuals are most frequently used for iconographic analysis, while the stylistic elements are marginalized. The primary reason for this is the present underestimation of Zograf's knowledge and their marginalization in art historical discourse. No one wants to go deep and say, that what they are painting, that has any sense, they're just catching something. But we have some very important archival sources that challenge this view. An important archival source that challenges this approach is the letter by one Serbian Zograf painter, Janko Mihajlović Mora, during the 1831 competition for painting the iconostasis of monastery Rač, Church of Monastery Rač. Janko specifies in the contracts, when not in this letter, actually here's what he can do, that all oil paints he uses. The models, he said, blue from München and so on and so on. But as well as particular characteristics of his Zograf manner. And he says, I quote, the faces will be painted like ivory. And then says further, with a little tungle, it says dunkel, shading in the features in the manner of the Russian painters. While for the garments, he says that they must blend Greek fashion. So this is one icon of Janko Mihajlović Mora. And you can see in many cases that this, for example, face is like ivory and, with similarity in clothes, and only this shading is still a little bit a problem. But this Janko Mihajlović's explanation reveals the hybrid nature of Zograf painting in the Principality of Serbia or everywhere. But that hybrid painting is not merely as a consequence of uncritically and without any knowledge adopting diverse influences, but as that he actually knew all different approaches to the Orthodox iconography in that time. Russian approach, something what is Balkan Greek, and this something else. And he can establish that models or to hybrid them, mix them in his paintings. The terminology he uses still requires proper interpretation and integration into the broader understanding of the Zograf icon painting. His account underscores just to need to advance both terminological and substantive knowledge of Zograf practice through the study of the archival material. Actually, in our cases, if you see, everyone is writing, we have these poor Zograf painters, they are illiterate, they don't know what are they doing, they are just doing something for some poor churches, and that is that. And that came from different positions. That is other question, we talked about that. The one position of the medieval scholars who say, no, that's only medieval scholars, nothing else. Other position came also from the, I don't know, some people who don't want to deal with that at all. But for us, I think especially in this room where many of us deal with Zograf painting, this kind of archival sources is very important. That means that what we will see actually, that Zografs are very well know what are they doing. But that is archive. And I will also mention, time is going very fast, one other aspect. So that is the construction of art historical archives and the construction of the art historical narratives. One significant example demonstrating the interdependence of archival research and art historical methodology relates to the reconstruction of broader art historical surveys, which will be explained through the study of church art in the 19th century Serbia. Established practices in art historical writing are often based on selecting the most important and finest artistic achievements. And that is actually very problematic if art history has to provide an accurate, scientifically grounded insight into a particular artistic practice. It cannot make the selection based on criteria as a style, nation, what is fine, what is ugly, what is... We have to understand everything. But we don't do that. In our writings, we have one kind of the construction about the national art or the art in one country, but on the other cases, what we have from the archives is absolutely different picture. This discrepancy between art historical narratives and archival reality becomes evident through numerous, for example, 18th century inventories and painting contracts, which actually reveal a significantly larger number of active painters in specific regions than typically cited in surveys. That most churches did not possess works with any dominant stylistic characteristic, for example. That economic factors, rather than any kind of theological or artistic ideals, often dictated production. Every documents we have, for example, this is these documents are I'm showing here is inventory of the library of the Serbian Metropolitanate in Belgrade, building of the Belgrade Metropolia. It's absolutely something that when you read this, what they have, it is small, you cannot connect it with any book. For example, what they have in the library, they are writing one icon from Moscow, one icon from Jerusalem, something printed in Vienna, one icon old, one icon with a silver garment. So many different things. And when we use when art historians started writing, they don't use this. They're just trying to make, I know the terms, the book like a cake with super examples that will show that our culture is so wonderful, that we have wonderful painters. And actually that is not anything what is scientific at all. No one believes in that. So you can compare in Yugoslav cases that was before the wars, who has most beauteous art, Croatia or Serbia. So it's stupid. But archives are still not actually used and read in cases everything what they need. It's also the very similar case that occurred with the research of the Serbian 19th century art. I know that that was the point of my magister work, church art in the Kingdom of Serbia, and my professor told me to go to the archives. The main reason was look for the contracts. I have still copies, from the 1990s. This is one of the contracts. Look for the contract. But actually, what we see in the documents, that is nothing what was connected with anything that I knew in that moment or was published in general. Actually, what became very important, that we have state legal regulations. We don't know anything about that. Art historian, we have, according to the law, that and that. We have the contract. What law? What is there? Then you have influences from many different groups. And then you have so important political, in that moment, situation of political or social. Then you have so important economic factors. So all that actually is constructing the picture how the visual culture or church culture in that moment was created. Not something what we previously knew, that we have these conclusions made on some kind of the connections, on the painting influences, and so on. One absolutely different picture of the artistic practice, and of course, therefore, we need new methodology to deal with these documents. We cannot use old methodological equipment. Of course, we cannot deny it. We cannot say we will never use. No, we have to use everything, but we have to understand also some other things. Okay. And simultaneously, during this research, for me became very clear that the construction of national paradigm in art has proven highly problematic. While it is logical that one cannot speak of national art before the formation of modern nations, it's not logical, but we always speak. And that national identities are fluid. So, art history often functions less as a scholarly study of visual practice and more sometimes as a creator of the nation and producer of national artistic past. So, but following the archives and the models from the archives, we know in the case of Serbia that there are so many different contexts. The context of the Habsburg monarchy, the context of the Ottoman Empire, the context of the Serbian state, the context of the Montenegro state. So we cannot put that mixed all together. So this archival material shown actually that these frameworks, all frameworks, that these archival frameworks cannot be ignored in favor of constructing a unified national culture. And that, you know, national, when we speak about something national, and we use the term Serbia and Srpski, we really have to be very precise what are we thinking about and put it also in this historical context. And there, I don't know, okay, time. Also, just a comment. Of course, archives are often just giving us insight in what could be research objects of art history. We know that all the time some kind of focus was of art history is primarily with the painting, but then oil painting and so on. But other forms of creative expression are just, moved them. They're applied arts. Although for the, since 1980s, you can find this traditional division between high and popular art has been challenged. It is still here. Archival evidences like this one, for example, just reveals this approach to be deeply problematic. In any sense, in the sense of the cost, in the sense of the energy which was made for creation, so many different things. We now had this Ricotrans project about the Russian icons, and we see, for example, from the documents, in the many cases, they are not looking for the icons, they are looking for the textile. In the writings to the Russia, please give us textiles. Very, some embroidery which is rich with the gold and so on. Maybe it was so important for them. It was so important. And in our study, we not connected that, or we neglect all that facts and so on. So I want just to stop, and maybe we can talk, just to make any kind of conclusion. Archives for us actually have a function as gravitational force. Possessing the power to maintain our historical studies within a contextual perspective. Of course, we have put the legs on the floor, hand above, but archives are putting us down. And archives and other methodological methods, together can bring us to much better conclusions and, what is most important, to the truth and, and also contributed to establishing art history as a science, not only as a discipline, essayistic or so. Thank you.
I would like to thank indeed Professor Makulevich for this serious and challenging actually introduction into our topic today. We have no discussion settled in the program, but I invite you to open the discussion during our coffee break.
Thank you.
from the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports, Referat of Antiquities of the Dodecanese in Rhodes, Greece.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Where
Where can I have to
have
go
it.
to the...
I will just read the title of her paper.
Yes, yes.
Her paper is dedicated to the medieval churches of Rhodes through archival photographs taken during the Italian occupation, 1912, 1940.
And then this one. Begin. Good morning, dear colleagues. Rhodes, now an UNESCO World Heritage Site, under the rule of the Knights Hospitaller, 1309-1522, the town became a bastion of Christianity and the breakwater of Turkish attacks on the Aegean. Its economic and strategic and importance grew, and at the end of the 15th century, Rhodes was the model of a fortified medieval stronghold and considered one of the most beautiful cities in the Eastern Mediterranean. Yes. The last period of foreign domination in the Dodecanese Islands, with Rhodes as capital, is known as the Italian occupation, 1912-1947. Its fascist administration was oppressive. This period has attracted the interest of scholars, as the issues of monument protection during the interwar period were of concern to the conquerors. In the context of their colonial policy of building and managing monuments and their surroundings, particularly in Rhodes, they sought to give their recent acquisition an Italian aura. The restoration of particular ancient monuments was often at the forefront of their priorities, alongside those medieval monuments associated with the power of the Hospitallers, as the regime made sure to appropriate this aspect of the island's past as an aid to a historical survival of ancient Rome. During the Italian occupation, the political objectives of the restoration generally dominated, with monuments serving as justification of the Italian presence in the Aegean Sea. Medieval churches, most of which had been converted into mosques after the Ottoman conquest, were generally ignored by the intervention to highlight selected monuments, since they don't lend themselves to the reconstruction of the sought-after Latin past. The Italian photographic archive, preserved in the Foret of Antiquities of the Dodecanese, consisting of 15,000 glass plates, constitutes a valuable testimony and is often our only source of information about work carried out during the Italian occupation and its priorities. Some of these photographs concern ecclesiastical monuments, mainly in the town of Rhodes. They present unique evidence of churches destroyed by political choices, by air raids during World War, or by subsequent building activity. This paper will examine representative cases whose study yields important clues about the modifications they have undergone over the year. Fascist ideals in Italian politics and the Central Power's hierarchy of values gradually pushed aside the needs of historicity. The endeavor of the fascist regime to identify itself with the achievements of the Order of the Hospital in their island state was characteristic. An attempt will be made here to work out the main lines followed by the Italian authorities by examining the survived pictorial material, since in most cases the documentation and publication of the various restoration projects is either very limited or totally lacking. We will begin with the conservation of the and the restoration of the painted decoration of medieval church, although medieval church led by Florentine painter and restorer Riccardo de' Bacci Venuti under the supervision of Soprintendenza. Although the effort to preserve and enhance the frescoes in the various monuments is obvious, the aesthetics and practices of the time led to extensive repainting and overpainting, in most cases undocumented. No diaries or photographs of the process were preserved, and in several cases the interventions resulted in a deterioration of the already poor state of conservation. In particular, in the Byzantine church now dedicated to St. Fanurios in the medieval town, the operation resulted in serious failures, which in some cases altered the authenticity of the surviving frescoes through the arbitrary restoration and completion of lost figures and scenes. In the elegant tetraconch church of 1497, dedicated to St. Nicholas at Fundukli in the Rhodian countryside, it's the previous, several misinterpretations occurred during the drastic conservation of the mural decoration. For instance, the angel of the Annunciation was repainted as a bearded figure, since his upper half has been completely lost. The damaged face of the mounted St. George was rendered in a purely Latin manner, as were many other figures. In the presentation of Jesus in the temple, the prophetess Anna, behind Simeon, almost completely destroyed, was restored through ignorance as a bearded male. In the raising of Lazarus, the original Martha, sister of Lazarus, kneeling before Christ, was replaced by a bearded male figure bearing the features of Peter. The restoration of the post-1282 murals in the cave church of St. Nikitas in Damatria was less wholesale as the iconographic program of the church had been preserved. However, the murals were covered with a thick layer of varnish, possibly linseed oil, which caused serious deterioration. Fortunately, photographs from the Italian archives provide valuable evidence of their original condition. In the little single-aisle church of the time of the hospital, St. George Hostos in Philerimus, Italian restorers carried out extensive mortar fillings and painting restoration. The same process is also followed in the long-abandoned Holy Trinity on the Street of the Knights, a small Gothic chapel. In most of the above mentioned medieval churches and in a number of monuments that will be mentioned below, the Soprintendenza ai Monumenti e Scavi either did not intervene at all or carried out minimal or minor building consolidation, with the result that the monuments were handed over the following years intact or with minor losses. The Italian Photographic Archive preserves some photographs of the period in the Church of St. Nicholas, St. Spyridon, St. Paraskevi, St. Constantine and Helen, Holy Trinity, Dolapli Mosque, the so-called St. Panteleimon, and the so-called Our Lady of Victory. However, in the case of the Metropolitan Church of the Orthodox after 1309, dedicated to Virgin Mary, which during the Turkish occupation was converted into a mosque de Mirli, Italian photographs proved irreplaceable, as the remorseless British air raids of 1944 completely destroyed the church along with numerous secular buildings around it. Excavation, this is a de Mirli, carried out in the 80s brought to light interesting aspects of its history. The photographic material of the medieval churches mentioned above does not betray interventions the Italians had in mind concerning them which they had no opportunity to carry out. Two examples will be cited in this regard. Intended Italian interventions in selected parts of the medieval town, always under the fascist mentality of the administration, were laid out in the plan produced by Paolini, an engineer. They intended to broaden Socrates Street, an operation which would have seriously affected the top end of the street occupied by the elegant Byzantine convent of St. George, Hurmali Medrese, through the destruction of its cells and other annexes. Fortunately, these plans remained dead letter. The monastic compound was saved by the troubles brought about by World War II. It remains, however, another example of the contempt for medieval monuments which the urban planning and priorities of the Italian administration rendered expendable. The choice made by the Italian government had drastic consequences in the case of Our Lady of the Borgo. Modifications in the plan provided for the opening of a new road bisecting the remains of the church. This Gothic church, the largest in the lower town, then still preserved most of the sanctuary and side walls incorporated into numerous houses of the Jewish quarter. Despite the documentation, the exterior facade were not restored, the work was interrupted, and in addition, soon thereafter, much of this great Latin church was demolished. The monument became a bone of contention between the Italian archaeologists who favored the consolidation and scholarly restoration of the ruins and the ambitions of the upgraded Italian Office of Public Works with military engineers. This controversy first brought Giulio Jacobi, then director of the Soprintendenza, into disfavor and then led to his dismissal. As a result, Al-Hadef Street soon cut through the church. Only in 1995, after excavation, the Hellenic Archaeological Service abolished the northern part of Al-Hadef Street and unified the dismembered monument without, of course, engaging in substantial restoration. The pursuit of purification of the monuments and the removal of features and phases of their long history is also reflected in the case of Our Lady of the Castle. The Byzantine Metropolitan Church of Rhodes was already in use in the 11th century, with a possible intermediate structural phase in the 13th century. The three-aisle cross in square domed church was severely damaged during the great earthquake that struck Rhodes in 1303. In 1322, under Grand Master Elion de Villeneuve, the church was ceded to the new Latin Archbishop of Rhodes. The work on the Latin Cathedral of the Virgin, which gave its monument its Gothic character, was completed thereafter. Until the end of the hospitallary period, the church retained its plain, austere lines. Under the Ottomans, the cathedral was turned into a mosque. Invasive interventions were considered necessary for the monument to recover its lost hospitaller character and eliminate the dissonance of Muslim additions. The dismissal and removal from Rhodes of archaeologist Giulio Jacobi, then director of the Soprintendenza, who resented its loss of status and outside intervention, gave the Italian administration the opportunity to take over the monument. It was rid of the Muslim additions, but some of the original Byzantine features was removed at the same time. With no respect for the historical phases of the monument, the portico, the minaret in the space that would once have been occupied by the belfry and other annexes were demolished. Plans for renovating the interior of the church in the same spirit by Governor De Vecchi, which fortunately could not be carried out, betray Italians' intentions to pursue more extensive interventions. It should also be mentioned that wholesale reconstruction or reinvention of the monuments was current practice. Prominent examples include the Church and Loggia of St. John, focus of worship of the Hospitaller Brethren, and a pilgrimage venue of great importance because of the relics kept there. The church was destroyed in 1856 by the devastating explosion of a powder magazine in its immediate vicinity, ignited when lightning struck the monument, the minaret. Many buildings around were razed to the ground and much building material was removed from the ruins. The foundation of the church came to light through large-scale excavation by the architect Logiaconou. However, the impossibility of rebuilding the church was already clear, as a neoclassical Ottoman school was standing on top of part of the lost church. Acceptance of this fact led to the decision to build a new Cathedral of St. John outside the medieval town at Bandraki Harbor. This was part of the promotion of the Catholic Church during the Italian occupation. Inaugurated in 1925, it was an approximate copy of the conventual Church of the Hospitallers in the Colacium, as illustrated in the engravings of Rotier. In the same context of assertive intervention should be regarded the complete reconstruction of the Roman Catholic Church in the Hospitaller Monastery of Our Lady of All Graces at Philerimos, but with extreme practices and additions even for that time. Mayuri, always careful in matters of restoration, directed operation as a simple scholarly consolidation. Unfortunately, soon thereafter, a full reconstruction was promoted by the politician and was carried out by architect Petrakou with significant alteration and the addition of a belfry partially concealing the southeast corner of the ancient temple of Athena, which lays beneath. It was erected as a Franciscan monastery following the aesthetics of the time, a period in which the Italian administration favored the promotion of a fake dominance of the Latin element with decorative mannerisms. Another class of Italian intervention, that of complete obliteration, affected medieval monuments which, for various reasons, stood in the way of the showcasing of the ancient past, especially the Roman era, which was clearly adopted by the Italian administration as a precursor. During excavation in the highest part of the northern town on St. Stephen's Hill, Montesmith, ruins of houses and other buildings and cemeteries from the classical, Hellenistic and Roman periods were discovered. The excavation revealed the remains of an early Byzantine basilica and traces of Byzantine settlement. Perhaps principal landmark of this settlement was the church of Agios Stephanos. Rothier has recorded the ruins of the church in 2 engravings, the only evidence of its presence. What had survived from the church swept away during the archaeological activity, this time without even photographic evidence, as part of the restoration of the temple of Apollo Pythios and the other monuments of the Acropolis. The issues of the management of the monuments and their surroundings were a long-standing concern of the colonial policy of the Italians, as a primary objective was to adapt the aspect of several monuments in quest of a recovery focused only in pagan antiquity. A typical example of this practice was the creation of a zone of archaeological interest to the east of the palace of the Grand Master in the medieval quarter. Following the general remodeling of the area, the excavation revealed the remains of the 2nd, 3rd century AD four-fronted triumphal tetrapylon, which stood on the junction of the Cardo with the principal decumanus of the Roman period, as well as the remnants of ship's head of the Rhodian arsenal. In medieval times, the whole area was densely settled and had a small Byzantine church of St. Demetrius. The Italians cleared the area of all types of buildings, both medieval and recent, in order to investigate and showcase the Roman tetrapylon and the installation of the ancient arsenal. The church itself was dismantled and relocated to the north because the remains it stood on were at first erroneously identified with the ancient sanctuary of Dionysus. It was reassembled in its location, but the loss of archaeological data was significant. The Soprintendenza was also active in excavation of late Roman and early Byzantine monuments, mainly in Kos, but also in Carpathos. Until many square meters of ancient mosaic pavements had been lifted from secular buildings in Kos and Carpathos, running counter to oral principles, as the cases of removal for reasons of protection were few indeed. The mosaics detached from their original context were mostly incorporated in the modern floors of the Palace of the Grand Master as decorative elements. The excavation at Arkassa on Carpathos should be particularly noted. Only the excavation report was published with valuable, albeit limited, photographic material, as no movable finds were collected. Parts of the mosaic from the Basilica of Hagia Sophia sent to Rhodes and found its place to the small courtyard of the Archaeological Museum of Rhodes. The decorative ornamental use that the Italian regime reserved for archaeological discoveries aimed to recreate the atmosphere of a public space of Italian medieval towns. This is made clearer by the removal of the monolithic font from the baptistry of the early Christian Basilica of Arnitha in Rhodes, which placed in the center of Argyro Square. Without any regard to the archaeological context, an inscribed early Byzantine column was set in the center of the baptismal font. In the present communication, which certainly does not exhaust the subject, typical cases of use and often abuse of monuments during the Italian occupation have been illustrated by the records of the photographic archive of the Italian occupation preserved in Rhodes. In the confrontation, in particular, when not ignored, often fell victims of the Italian administration's obsession with the supremacy of the ancient past over medieval remains. The tendency of Italian civilian authorities was to appropriate sometimes the hospitaller past and sometimes Roman rule. After the incorporation of the Dodecanese Islands to the Greek state in 1947, the Archaeological Service has tried and continues to struggle not to disregard the benefits of the Italian occupation, but to showcase medieval monuments as precious part of cultural patrimony in a continuous struggle to explore, restore, and safeguard antiquities under the immense pressure of urban expansion and economic exploitation. Thank you very much.
Now we go further fast because time pressure with Ovidio Lat from the Institute for Habsburg and Balkan Studies of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and also from Nikolai Yoga History Institute in Bucharest, and with the support of Mihai Cristiano Mariuții from Snowball Institute of History in Iași.
The title of Ovidio's paper is Istanbul's Romanian Stones, Marcel Romanescu's Travel Album.
PDF. View aici. Okay.
Read.
Full screen, uite.
Oh, pardon.
Okay, it works. Thank you very much. Let me first thank to the organizer, and particularly Margarita, for inviting us, and also apologize in the name of Mihai for not being able to be here. Actually, she's going to be promoted those days, so it was for let's say for a good cause, his absence. What I'm going to talk today is about a very peculiar travelogue, which was donated to Nicolae Iorga and the Romanian Academy in 1932. So I will start by presenting a bit the context, both of the creation of the travelogue and how we got to get interested in the topic, then a bit of the one who compiled it, and we will finish by trying to place it in this time in the, let's say, ideological context of the time. The starting point was a peculiar observation, the fact that in the 1930s, many Romanian writers, scholars and diplomats traveled to Istanbul. It was like a sudden fascination after the fall of the empire and the foundation of the republic. Ataturk becomes a very interesting figure for our intellectuals, and therefore they flow to Istanbul, not to Ankara. Even our diplomatic representatives refused to leave Istanbul, so the transfer to Ankara was heavily negotiated and happened at a later date. This flow of travelers was facilitated by two things. First, the fact that a ship, King Carol I, operated weekly on a route between Constanța, Varna, Istanbul, and Thessaloniki. That was the first place. And the second was the secularization that occurred after the fall of the empire. Topkapı Palace, for example, became a museum in 1924. Therefore, they were able to actually see things that previously were not accessed. And one of the items that were produced on this occasion is, for example, a fascinating non-fictional account of a travel to Constantinople by one of our prominent novelists of the interwar period, Camil Petrescu, Rapid Constantinople Bioram, simple itinerary for the use of Bucharesters. We will not talk about that. The most funny one being the accounts, anecdotal accounts of travel to Constantinople in 1929 by another famous Romanian writer, Mihail Sadoveanu. Sadoveanu wanted to check whether the facts, the descriptions of Istanbul in his novels were accurate. He goes to Constantinople, decides that he got it right from the very beginning, so he doesn't even note down any kind of further notes or something like this. Okay, my imagination worked perfectly. I described it as it is. I don't need to bother. So his companions, also two quite interesting and good writers, wrote about the trip they made together, but the account, although funny, is more about Sadoveanu, the writer, than about, and we have them in the archives. This is the Museum of Romanian Literature. Meanwhile, the scholars had a different focus. They were interested in early modern, what they called Romanian precious objects, namely Moldavian and Wallachian documents and artifacts preserved in various repositories of the city. And we have like two very important, let's say, tools: the checklist of the Romanian documents in the archive of the Metochion of the Holy Sepulchre, which were produced by Father Paul Mihailovic, and another description of that's in the title, in both of their titles, Romanian objects in the collections of Topkapi Palace. While the scholars were chasing documents, the diplomats were particularly captivated by what they call Romanian traces, referring to significant monuments and artifacts that held relevance to Romanian history and culture. And two of them are extremely prominent: Marcel Romanescu, the one I will talk about today, and Marcu Beza. They favored the travelogue-like approach in providing a very pictorial and vivid depiction of those landmarks. We chose Romanescu, a disclaimer, because we are lazy. We realized we wanted to start with Beza. It's much more interesting. However, it's much more work, because the Beza archive is currently separated in several parts: private collectors, so difficult access; the Museum of Collections in Bucharest, easier access. However, the most important part is in the diplomatic archives of Romania. The access is possible, but it's a bit complicated, so it takes time. So we chose Romanescu for pure laziness. However, in the conclusions for the written paper, we will address both of them. So Romanescu's album, what's about it? It was compiled in May 1932, and it was presented to the Romanian Academy in November of that year, courtesy of Nicolae Iorga. Romanescu was fascinated by Iorga. They were in correspondence. He sent it to Iorga. Iorga gave it to the Romanian Academy. It consisted of 32 photographs taken by a famous photographer in the Pera district of Istanbul, Jan Weinberg, a Jew of Romanian origins. The first 19 photos depicted houses and churches in the Fener and Balat neighborhoods, and the other 13 photos were reproductions of documents that were kept in the safe of Dresdner Bank concerning the monastery of the Great Cave, Megaspileon, near Calavrita in the Peloponnesus. The photos and documents were detached. It's a practice that probably will be discussed those days. Were detached and transferred to the manuscript section of the Library of the Romanian Academy 1 week after their official reception, and they were immediately described and edited in a very peculiar manner by Iorga. The depleted album became part of the engraving sections of the same library. So they basically cut the album in two parts. So who was the compiler? One of those interesting diplomats that we had, he had no interest in diplomacy per se, but he came from a very good family, studied law and philosophy in the 20s, and then went immediately to diplomacy because, and I quote, he was driven by passion for travel and curiosity. So this kind of guys of a very nice family, and diplomacy was just a way for them to kind of be able to travel, write poetry. He writes a screenplay in 1929, for example. He adapts for cinema That Mill That Came with the Floods, a novel of Sadoveanu, one of the guys that were in there. So Actually, the superiors were quite disappointing in him because he was like more traveling than actually working. But for us, it's good because during one of his travels, he's sent to Cairo. He's in no mood to work. Therefore, he stops for an extended period of time in Constantinople, where he orders and commissions the photographs that we were discussing here. He returned and quit diplomacy. Actually, this saved his life. Because he wasn't kind of neither thrown to jail by the communists nor executed. He left quite before the Romanian joining the Nazis against the Soviet Union. So kind of he ended his life peacefully, delivering lectures, translating, and writing poetry. So this is the guy. The part of the documents that he sent to Yorga, he published them himself in a very interesting journal, Wheat Grains, it was called. It was published for 4 years, between 1930 and 1934. And it's important to just highlight the title, Romanian Monuments in Istanbul. That was that he's saying, and the focus being on the Romanian thing. And the Wheat Grains was an interesting journal because it had a cultural, let's say, scope. The aim was cultural. It was a monthly cultural magazine. And it operated under the auspices of the Directorate for Popular Education, the Romanian Social Institute, and the Romanian's official government gazette. So it was a publication that was meant to educate the population, like not the lowest strata of the population, but let's say like middle strata of the population, which is very interesting because it shows what was the public that was targeted. So now let me a bit present you the photos. To my knowledge, to our knowledge, they are unknown, the Romanian academic milieu, and this collection was only mined for data, so it was not a serious attempt to catalog it, and not all the photos are published, so basically only part of them. What you can see is different houses in the Fanar neighborhood, different monuments like churches, the Patriarchal Church, Saint George, the Church of the Metochion of the Holy Sepulchre, the chapel of the Moldavian diplomatic agency in Constantinople, Muhliotisa, so-called Saint Mary of the Mongols, with quite interesting fresco depicting the Last Judgment. According to Achillas Milas, it was destroyed in 1948. So basically, the photos provided in this travelogue are the only surviving testimonies of this peculiar, probably early 18th century depiction of the Last Judgment. And again, the focus being different houses in the Fener neighborhood. What links this together? So what I found interesting, what we found interesting, is the claim that it is good for the Romanians to know that in Istanbul we too have our own stones. This is the word he's saying, so no landmarks, no, it's stones. And that starting in the 16th century, an uninterrupted Romanian life flourished at the port. And this kind of strikes us, what exactly did Romanescu meant by Romanian life that flourished at the port since the 16th century. So we just checked what are the stones that he's describing. And he's describing one stone in the Balat neighborhood, which is the diplomatic residence of Moldavia, called Bogdan Sarai and its chapel. And the others, all others, are in Fener, therefore in the proximity of the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarchate, namely the diplomatic residence of Valahia, Vlah Sarai, and its Church of St. George, several quote, Greco-Romanian houses, the library and archive of the Metochion of the Holy Sepulchre, Dimitrie Cantemir's palace, the Church of St. Mary of the Mongols, Muhliotisa, whose administrator was Cantemir, and which has always enjoyed the support of the Romanian princes, another quotation, and which depicted a framed fresco of the Last Judgment. Based on those monuments, on those stones, Romanescu concluded that the true Romanian atmosphere can be found in Fener, which he defines as a cradle of Romanian life, containing all the essential elements for a thriving culture. So not only Romanian life, but also thriving culture. Basically, what he says, and this is the another epitome of it, the ancestral piety of the Romanian rulers, who, as heirs of the Byzantine tradition, were the first to sign the gospel on Easter night at the patriarchate they endowed, just as they stood at the forefront of the righteous at the Saint Mary of the Mongols, or founded the monasteries of Lhasa and Megaspilon. That's his way, poetic way of saying, but we highlighted the idea. Romanian rulers as heirs of the Byzantine tradition. So basically what Romanescu says is that the Fanariots are Romanians. That's the basic translation, because the Romanian rulers that he insists, especially those in the 18th century, Cantemir included, were actually the ones responsible for the Romanian monuments. Now, many of these ideas of the Fanariots as being Romanian, the fact that he avoids the use of term Fanariots and he used Greco-Romanian houses for actually defining the buildings and the constructions of the Greek archondes that were in the capital, that resonates with Nicolae Iorga's Byzance après Byzance, the continuation of the history of the Byzantine life, which was published in 1935. So 3 years after Romanescu gave the travelogue to Iorga. However, Iorga's ideas on the topic circulated before that, and Romanescu was in close contact with Iorga, was aware of them. So what are those ideas? According to Iorga, Byzantium was a complex of institutions, a political system, a religious formation, and a type of civilization. So it was not a state as we understand this today. It was an idea, and Iorga concludes, ideas survive all disasters. So basically what he does in Byzantium after Byzantium is to see how exactly this idea survived. And he considers that the survival act is basically the most impressive thing that Byzantium has ever done, to endure. So in this book that I will not present in detail, but it's famous for its title and less for its content. We would assume that nobody reads it today, but kind of everybody quotes it. However, 2 chapters are dedicated to the Byzantine imperial idea through the Romanian principalities, the heirs of the Byzantine tradition in Romanescu's text, as well as to the Romanian princesses' protection of the Byzantine church and civilization. Again, what Romanescu is insisting by saying that, the donations to the Patriarchate, to Saint Mary on the Mongols, to Vlah Sarai are actually entitles him to speak of Romanian stones. The donations to those monasteries and churches makes it that they are partly, at least partly Romanian. And of course, another chapter in Iorga deals with the Renaissance through school, also basically focusing on Wallachia and Moldavia. Now, what's interesting is that Iorga was actually in this scheme. The Fanariots play a very important part because they are basically entrusted with a very important role in the survival of the Byzantine idea, and they form a very important piece of the chain of this transmission and survival. And in fact, Iorga was the first historian to ever attempt a truly impartial analysis of the Fanariot phenomenon. In February 1898, during a conference at the Athenaeum in Bucharest, he expressed his intention, clearly expressed it, to rehabilitate the Fanariots. Those are his words. And he cast these stigmatized figures in the pivotal role of continuators of the Byzantine tradition within the Ottoman Empire. So basically between 1898 and 1935, when Byzantium after Byzantium appears, numerous other studies were produced by him where he debunked myths and related to the Fanariots and proposed a novel approach. Basically what he does is to show that, and I quote, "The damned Fanar, a nest of intrigues, a hideout for crimes, trampling on everything that kinship and friendship represent, was a concept that was no longer tenable." For Iorga, the 18th century was marked by a cultural and historical Romanian-Greek synthesis. Again, what Romanescu is doing by saying that what we call now the archontical houses or the Fanariot houses are in fact Greek-Romanian houses. The idea of synthesis is present also in Romanescu's paper. Consequently, in his history of the Romanians, Iorga is not even using once the term Fanariot for the 18th century, and he speaks of reformers. And thus you have a sample of a letter from Iorga to Romanescu in which he thanks Romanescu for sending him a Greek manuscript from Cairo. So now the conclusions. The 1932 travelogue by Romanescu is particularly important. On the one hand, travelers were generally disinterested in the poor and decrepit Fener and Balat, gravitating instead towards grand palaces, imposing mosques, and bustling marketplaces. In fact, apart from Artamonov, we currently know of no other, like say, photographer interested in those neighborhoods. All focus on the Byzantine past or on the Ottoman, let's say, monuments. On the other hand, many of the monuments photographed in 1932 have since disappeared forever. The fresco of the Last Judgment in St. Mary of the Mongols, as the neighborhoods change rapidly and dramatically. In one case, the monument still exists, but part of its once photographed inventory does not. Very important is to note that when we mine those travelogues for data, we should keep in mind that these monuments were photographed through a national lens. Romanescu was very well acquainted with Iorga's writings and sought to contribute to his cultural program, fueling him with photographs and manuscripts. And this this gift to Iorga in 32 should therefore be considered a piece of the broader picture of Byzantium, after Byzantium, Iorga's construct, which we plan to examine in the future, and our next step will be Beza. Thank you very much.
The title of her paper is Documenting Change, Patmos Through Historic Photographs. Please.
Good morning. In April of the year 1088, with the crucible of Emperor Alexios Komnenos, the island of Patmos was ceded to the monk Christodoulos from Mount Latros in order to establish his monastery there. The holy elder prioritized the fortification of the monastery. However, for all the urgency with which he applied himself to the task, the blessed Christodoulos did not live to see his work completed. After only 5 years spent on the island, pursued by the Turks, he was forced to abandon Patmos and seek refuge on Evia, where he left his last breath. His followers undertook the assignment of finishing what he had begun when they returned to Patmos a few years later and translated his holy relic to the monastery. By the mid-12th century, the fortifications were finished. In his will, drafted in 1272, Abbot Germanos describes his efforts to protect the Christian flock from marauding pirates. At that time, the early nucleus of Hora had begun to take shape around the monastery. In 1454, Abbot Mattheos was the representative of the island's inhabitants as head of the religious authority officially recognized by the Sultan. Patmos was once again at the heart of conflicts and raids in the Aegean. Nonetheless, thanks to the excellent diplomacy of the monastery, the island's prosperity was secured. In May 1912, Italian historian and archaeologist Giuseppe Gerola received a telegram from the Italian Ministry of Education with instructions to travel to the Aegean for the purpose of drawing up a detailed catalogue of the archaeological sites and monuments of the Dodecanese Islands. His task was extremely challenging. It was accomplished amidst complicated political upheavals in the international diplomatic scene, while the Italian military campaign to conquer the Dodecanese after 4 centuries of Ottoman rule was still in progress. The hopes of the Aegean Islanders for freedom were expressed under the roof of the most magnificent monastery of St. John the Theologian in the Pan-Dodecanesian Conference held there on June 4th. But this would only be realized in 1948, when the Dodecanese finally became part of the Greek state. In 1912, Gerola was 35 years old. A few days after receipt of the formal government order, he spent 80 days journeying across the South Aegean. Within this time frame, with Rhodes as his base, the indefatigable researcher inspected Patmos, Leros, Kálymnos, Kos, Simia, Stipalea, Kassos, Kárpathos, Kastelorizo, Nísiros, Tylos, Chalki, and Talimnia. Of his 80-day journey, Gerola spent on Patmos only 2 days, June 18th and 19th. He began taking photos as soon as the ship started its slow approach to the sheltered port of Scala. On the bow of the ship, the flag of the Kingdom of Italy was fluttering in the wind. The serenity and beauty of the landscape captivated him immediately. His lens captured the whitewashed warehouses along the waterfront, the church of Saint Phocas and the small chapel of Saint Paraskevi perched upon its rock, and the medieval footpath winding its way gently along the hillsides. We can follow his tracks by studying his photographs in sequence. They clearly reveal the route he followed from the moment he set foot on the cobblestone quay. At first he was attracted by the rectangular tower house known as the Tower of Poulou that once stood at the settlement of Scala. A letter of February 15, 1917, addressed to Capitano di Maudi by Amedeo Maiuri, Italian archaeologist and first inspector of monuments and excavations in the Dodecanese, discloses his intention of consolidating this remarkable monument that most probably dated from the 15th century. Maiuri's letter and Gerola's photograph are precious evidence on this medieval stronghold that would collapse some years later. As might have been expected, the scholar, ascending the old footpath steeply rising from Scala to Chora, turned his lens towards the cave of Apocalypse, where St. John the Theologian, the son of thunder, is believed to have written the visionary text of the Revelation. In his general view of the sacred landscape, it is possible to distinguish the ruined walls of the Patmias ecclesiastical school, founded in 1713. Along the horizon, the outlines of the 4 windmills of Chora stand out, still to be seen today on the brow of the hill. The cave itself, its enclosure, and a number of chapels and monastic cells create an interesting architectural ensemble. Gerola went slightly off the path and walked through the fields to photograph the northern side of the Apocalypse. It is by a fortunate chance that this picture accidentally included again the remains of the Patmias, the small churches of St. Barbara and St. Thomas, and high on the hill, the now completely lost windmill at the west side of Chora. Halfway along the cobbled path, the imposing north front of Chora and the renowned fortified monastery stood out more impressively. Before entering the monastery, Gerola took a photograph of its east side. The masonry of the walls attests to the ravages of time and erosion. This is also obvious in a shot taken from the roofs of the monastery, where some ruined houses that no longer exist today are still visible. Standing at the highest spot of the tallest building of Patmos, he grasped the opportunity to present us with a bird's-eye view of the harbor of Scala. After his visit to the monastery, Gerola walked across the entire settlement from one end to the other. He photographed the windmill at the easternmost edge and the mansions overlooking the sea with their facades tightly arranged in a straight line on the northern brow of the hill. The building of the Camposelion school, now the town hall of Patmos, caught his eye with the elaborate frame of its Gothic window. From there, he continued to the female monastery of Zeodochos Pigi, took a picture of its paved courtyard, and proceeded to the western edge of the settlement. Turning his gaze to the south, he took a general view of the area with the small rural houses, churches, and fields. Besides its thematic richness, the documentation of Gerola is also a delight, since his inquisitive gaze focused on anything that caught his interest, local people included. The photographic lens, with heartwarming curiosity, portrays a family that pose eagerly, the man courteously touching his hat before the outlandish stranger. It is drawn by a gathering of women sitting on the ground sharing their news, delineates respectfully the austere face of a monk solemnly standing before the camera. The photographic archive of the Effort of Antiquities of the Dodecanese preserves 35 pictures taken by Gerola during his 2 days exploratory sojourn on Patmos. The result of his survey were published in just a few pages of his article entitled I monumenti medievali delle 13 sporadi in the Annuario della Regia Scuola Archeologica di Atene in 1916. In the chapter headed Le Isole dei Monaci di Patmos appear 11 pictures. Glass plates of 4 of them are still kept at the Ephorets archive. The house next to the pharmacy, Old House, the Female Monastery, and the Apocalypse. The archive of the Ephoret also contains historical documents providing a link to the way Italian archaeologists dealt with the heritage. The file labeled Governo delle Isole Egee Archivio Patmos holds 3 handwritten pages recording the archaeological sites and monuments of Patmos. They may well be Gerola's notes. Official documents signed by Amedeo Maiuri reveals his constant preoccupation with the protection of the monastery's cultural treasures. The archive also includes some pieces of his personal correspondence, such as a letter addressed to him by his friend Nicola Festa, the noted classical philologist and senator of the Kingdom of Italy. As far as we can tell, in this written message, Festa had suggested that Maiuri ask for a subsidy from the Ministry of External Affairs in order to organize a scholarly expedition to Patmos. The ministry rejected the proposal for financial reasons, and the project never materialized. As far as Patmos is concerned, the black and white photographs recording the extensive restoration work carried out in the monastery in the 1950s are also of great importance. On July 9, 1956, a destructive 7.7 earthquake on the Richter scale shook the Aegean. The monastery of Patmos suffered very serious damage. In order to thoroughly record the damage, architect Evstathios Stikas was sent as a representative of the Greek Service for the Restoration of Monuments, then led by the well-known architect Anastasios Orlandos. After conducting in situ investigation jointly with the Effort of Antiquities, Ioannis Kodis, Stikas submitted his report, in which he notes that the gatehouse and the belfry have fallen to pieces. The consolidation of the former and the reconstruction of the latter were considered as works to be carried out as soon as possible. The photographs taken during the construction of the new belfry are very interesting. Its earlier form is recorded in a photograph taken by Georgios Labakis during his visit to Patmos and published in his article in the newspaper Alithia in 1908. It also appears in 2 undated black and white shots, definitely taken before 1958. The new bell tower, although less elegant than the one destroyed by the earthquake, has over the years become a landmark of the monastery. As a result of the earthquake, the post-Byzantine murals of the Chapel of the Virgin were detached, revealing the 12th century layer of painting that lay underneath, a splendid achievement of Constantinopolitan art. Its uncovering was entrusted to conservator Fotis Zachariou. Very few photographs document this significant work. Within the setting of this restoration project, the flat roofs of the monastery were covered with tiles to prevent the penetration of rainwater. In addition, some parts of the fortification wall, which were in a precarious state, as well as the crowning crenellations, were consolidated. Restoration involved repair of the masonries. The ruined guest houses on the west side were pulled down and replaced by a 4-story building. The ambitious project was completed mostly because of the wholehearted contribution of local craftsmen who worked with enthusiasm and offered their donkeys and mules to transport the materials. When finished, the monumental complex had been armored for the next 50 years. In 2019, once again, the Ministry of Culture planned a new program to protect the monastery. Specialist architectural studies were put together. The restoration works included the rehabilitation of the flat roofs, the pointing and consolidation of parts of the fortification wall, the conservation of the painted decoration, and the restoration of the monastery refectory. Throughout the project's implementation, the archival photographic material of the years 1956 to 1958 served as an original source of documentation, offering data for the better understanding of the monument and helping to distinguish original masonries from the new constructions built in the 1950s. The monastery of St. John the Theologian, together with the medieval settlement of Chora, constitute an exceptional example of outstanding architectural interest. The provisions of the Greek legislation safeguard its authenticity. If it were not for the persistence and strict control by the effort of antiquities of the Dodecanese throughout all these years, the unique character of Patimian architecture would probably have been lost by now. Nevertheless, the island's landscape has been affected under the impact of social and touristic developments. Nowadays, Patmos is burdened with excessive construction. Archival photographs, poetic and mystical as they are still here to refresh our memory of the past and remind us of our duty to preserve our cultural heritage. Thank you.
The title of her presentation is National Museum of Medieval Art in Kosovo, Albania, and the Story of Extraordinary Collection. Please.
Thank you for making us part of this organization and the conference. And I'd like to introduce our museum, a special treasure in our country, Albania, and I think for all the post-Byzantine world. The National Museum of Medieval Art was first established in 1980, comprising one of the richest collections of Middle Age, including Byzantine and post-Byzantine art, as well as other non-religious objects. There are around 8,200 objects, where 6,400 are icons, which are listed in its inventory and displaying shelves. Other objects like stone fragments from basilicas, carved wood fragments of iconostasis, metal and cloth objects, religious objects and not religious objects. The museum displays a collection of 400 icons that are in the permanent exhibition. They have been selected as the most valuable, important works, various periods and artists. Many of them are anonymous, but some of them are well-named artists, iconographers in Albania and also in the region. The collection of National Museum of Medieval Art is one of the largest collections of Byzantine and post-Byzantine art in the world due to the circumstances that was created. In 1967, everything that belongs to the religion has been abandoned, destroyed, burned down, looted, along with their contents, in the name of the communist atheism. which prohibited all the forms of the religious expressions. This period has been the most difficult and the savage of the 20th century and the worst iconoclasm. During the dictatorial time, in a period where religion and its belief were continuously under attack, destroying religious objects was a primary aim. A few years after 1967, a group of some researchers, academics, at a great personal risk, traveled all over Albania, trying to save from the destruction all the religious temples in the name of the cultural heritage. So Fan Popa, his family was persecuted a few years later, Victorie Busanova, Dorga Adamo were some of the heroes that identify the churches, the periods, the inscriptions, the authors of the frescoes, the icons, and they write a history about the religious activities and the way of living through centuries, and they try to collect and preserve all the religious items and especially icons. This object has been placed in the former cathedral in Korça town as a center of the major part of the churches they originated from. In 1980, when the National Museum of Medieval Art was sheltered under the roofs of one of the most important churches, cathedrals, in the city of Korça, the life-giving spring, which played a vital role in preserving objects of such an important cultural heritage for the people of this country. Starting from 2016, the museum is accommodated in a contemporary building which provides the necessary required standards for a proper exhibition, including preserving and restoration measures for storing such a valuable treasure. Medieval art is reflected in harmony with the contemporary architecture, Byzantine, and colors compared together with mystic and of another world, making the experience in the museum quite special and unforgettable. There are the same heroes that added a lot of ethnography objects, dresses into the inventory and the exhibitions of the museum, with the purpose of covering the largest collection of icons and other religious objects, and they also named the museum the National Museum of Medieval Art, it still holds this name, to keep the collection safe and to have the possibility to show to common people and the youth of every generation that our country has a religious history, a Byzantine tradition, and to see objects like a representative of the artistic wealth and cultural heritage, and to write about the history of art. All the 400 selections that are the permanent exhibition has been selected as most valuable, important works, various periods and artists, many of them anonymous, but some of them are well-named artist iconographers in Albania. The other part of the objects and icons are kept safe at the museum inventory. During the Ottoman occupation, the Byzantine culture and the Orthodox religion and development, the post-Byzantine period was very important for our country. The collection of a National Museum of Medieval Art starts with a considerable number of artifacts, carved stone, from the beginning of Christianity in Albania region, from basilicas from the 5th until 11th century, and this range of objects like stones, capital fragments, or iconostas fragments are originated from Durrës, Lin, Pier, different areas in Albania. In that Albania is situated between Western Empire of Rome and Eastern Byzantium, Eastern Empire, so has been always in, as it continues to be, always in the middle of these two enormous imperials and cultures. The museum contains a small number of artwork from Byzantine period because of iconoclasm and also the long years of the centuries of Ottoman period. The oldest paintings are, which have survived to these days are some of the frescoes, mural paintings, from the 11th century and the portable icons that we have in the museum from the 14th to 15th century. The iconography in this period is mainly of the Paleological style. It stands out for its elegant but also strong lines, as well as for the harmony between colors and contrasts, and they are at the same time very special, extremely suggestive, and mystical at the same time. These icons carry true artistic values, such as Archangel Michael of St. Mary with Christ, found in the Yeremic churches. Doors with beautiful doors with the birth of the Virgin are from the island of Maligrad, Prespa. These are the original doors from the cave, from this cave church. Craft metal buckles were also used for the decor. The side frame is engraved with geometric motifs. Some small parts are same from this. These two door shutters have the same style of decoration. In the upper part there are two circles. In the middle of the motifs created crosses, while in the third division the same motif is placed diagonal. Metal buckles are used also to decorate the door. The Archangel Michael is one of the most valuable works of the museum collection. Its origin is from St. Mary Church in a village close to Cortian, Boria. This is anonymous. The Archangel Michael, as the protector of the Byzantine churches, is one of the highest quality artistic works that we have in the museum and the most representative. The icon is painted in accordance with the classical traditions. The sweet modeling connects it with the excellent Paleological tradition of 30th, 40th century. This is another Archangel Michael that has a special history related to the hard dictatorial period. This icon belongs to the 40th century and originates from Cortian region also, and from the anonymous author. This is a large panel, and during the dictatorship, the icon was found used as a door in a stable for animals in a village. It was all burned and black, nothing can be seen. But the eye of the specialist took it and brought it to our laboratory at the museum, and this masterpiece came to life. In the post-Byzantine period, we have a large of icons. The major part of the icons are from the Byzantine period. This artwork reflected the different artistic tendencies of the periods and transformation the post-Byzantine paintings came across in the Albanian territory. One of the well-named artists is Onufri, the great master from Albania. The museum holds the largest number of the icons created by this artist, iconograph, to whom has been given a reserved special display. Onufri is shown as an artist with extraordinary talent who knew very well the Byzantine tradition, but also the Western art. He was a revealed master in composition and the use of colors, which plays a dominant role in his work. His use of reds stand out, very special, which radiate strongly to the golden background and contrast beautifully with the green and deep blues. Along with the colors within his composition, landscape are beautifully placed portraits with contrast, as well as the combination of the several scenes within the frame, which distinguish Onufri and this art, making him unique and incomparable. The works are preserved in good conditions, thanks also to the good techniques that he used to create them. These are the icons from Vizcuj village. It's an area that has large activity during the 7th century. These are the icons, the changes that post-Byzantine paintings underwent after the 16th century are clearly visible. There is a return to some features of Byzantine art. Their style is harsh, and we find this spirit in the period in the territories of the southeastern Albania and in northern Greece. The volume starts and flattens almost completely. Colors become more frugal and tends to become more decorative. The drawing is mostly linear. The spirit of the icons is anti-classical. The portraits are painted simply with a strong graphic sense. On the brown preparation, the lights are turned with a warm ochre without many tones passing. Okay. These icons are associated with a painter who signed his work as the teacher Constantine. Another icon from IIIZK area, a city close to Korça. This is Holy Friday with her life scenes. Very interesting icon. And also we have another pavilion for 18th century. And these are very important names exhibited in this area, like Constantine, the Hieromonk, very talented and very styled artists, icon makers. And also we have, this is Saint Mary. This is a very unique icon because it's a very rare form of painting Saint Mary pregnant. And that's a unique painting. Also from Constantine Hieromonk. And this is Constantine of Spat, from the Spat area in the central Albania. He is very talented also in miniatures and very detailed and very beautiful icons from the 18th century. And we have the Zography brothers with a large activity, not only in Albania area, in Korça area, but also in Greece and other countries. They are two brothers that were located in Korça. They have their atelier there, and they paint like they were influenced from the art that was during this period at the western part of Europe. But also they learned and traveled to Mount Athos. They have huge activity, and their icons are like a mix with this Byzantine art of Mount Athos and also this influence of from western part. And this is from David Selenița, another well-named artist from 18th century that he has returned to the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance. His icons are very simple. other well-known artists like the Katro or Chetiri brothers. We came to the 19th century that everything is changed, the way of painting, the way of thinking of the icon. It's more Western. And we have, since 1980, where the museum was open, and until these days, we have the laboratory of restoration, conservation, that take care of, for all icons. We have a huge cooperation with Greece, with a Byzantine museum that make for 5 years, and then we continue. We have our own magazine that publish our own researches or activities that we make. The museum is also organized different activities to make more promotive and to know, to widespread the good name, to have more people. Also the education for culture with children of different ages is very important for our museum activity. We can find it in... Thank you.
Now, the last presentation here on this panel, Mariam Bardanian from Yerevan State University in Armenia.
Yes, the title of her paper is The Role of Private Archives in Preserving Armenian Arts and Culture by Creating Community Museums. Please.
I find my presentation. Where is it? Okay. First of all, I want to express my gratitude, my greetings to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to being here, to Dr. Margarita Kuyumjieva for her invitation letter, and of course my dear friend Arina Boykina, who is unfortunately not here today. As a result of various historical events during the ages, and especially the Armenian genocide in the beginning of 20th century, Armenian new communities formed in different countries of the world, saved the problems of preserving Armenian identity, Armenian art and culture. In this purpose, Armenian museums under the authority of the Church or community were created in different countries of the world. The aim of this paper is to present the Armenian museums created in different countries where private archival materials occupied a significant place in the basis of their formation. Thank you. These include paintings, graphic works, sculptures, art metal samples, textile samples, photographs, documents, etc. These archives contain important information not only about the culture and art development of the colony, but also are important for the study of history and ethnography. Moving to foreign countries, Armenians were sometimes able to take with them documents, family relics, which were either donated by themselves or transferred to local museums after their death. In some cases, individuals saw the salvation of their possessions in donating them to the appropriate museum, thus contributing to the preservation of very important materials, putting them in one place and making accessible to researchers. The process of creating museums in communities and equipping them with individual archives is also present today. The study of these archives has a great role in filling the gaps regarding the development of Armenian arts and culture. I have compiled the presentation taking as example 3 museums, which I have visited them. Although there are very many Armenian museums in the world, but I think these 3 examples can show the process. The earliest in these three museums is the Dudian Museum of the Armenian Diocese of Romania in Bucharest. In 1930, a large Armenian exhibition was planned to be held in Bucharest, for the implementation of which in the 1920s, the curator of the exhibition, Armenologist, Orientalist, member of the Romanian Academy, Jacob Sironi, with Nicolae Iorga, by the way, traveled through the country and collected exhibits. The number of exhibits collected suggested to Sironi the idea of creating a museum and a library. So, as a result, in 1927, the Armenian House of Culture was established in Bucharest, including the library of old printed books. This is the library, and the museum. It was later renamed Dudian after the surname of the sponsor of the building. In 1948, being at the head of the state, socialists, after unsuccessful attempts to nationalize the House of Armenian Culture, gave it to the municipal library. In 1963, the House of Armenian Culture were ultimately closed, and the collection was separated and transmitted to the private individuals and to the diocese. Nonetheless, it was reopened only in 1987. Mainly in the museum, objects from various churches are collected and samples of the personal archives of community members. Secular objects are very few. They are the belongings of individuals, particularly of noble families of Romanian Armenians. I have selected only a few samples to show. This is a woman's silver gilded belt made in Constantinople in 19th century. A woman's silver belt made in Sivas, again in 19th century. Belts and buckles from Constantinople are known in quite large quantities. They appear both in museums and at various auctions. Essentially, their typological types are known, and this type is one of them. But the silver belt made in Sivas, in this case of research, was more important, as the silver mark, tugra, on it, which indicates the place of preparation, undoubtedly made possible to identify other Sivas belts and to highlight the artistic description of belts made in this city. A women's handbag was very popular in the 19th and 20th, early 20th centuries, both in the Ottoman Empire, the Caucasus, and Western Europe countries. There are also notable examples of textile. For example, a 19th century silver-threaded silk antares with gold-threaded lace. Unfortunately, it was not revealed in time who the donor was, so we don't know. The next museum, it is Ararat Eskidjian Museum in Los Angeles. The Ararat Eskidjian Museum was established in 1985 by Mr. Luther Eskidjian, a survivor of the Armenian genocide. So his vision was to create an Armenian museum telling the Armenian story through artifacts, art, maps, books, coins, etc. So he began with his own private collection, opening the door for others to donate as well. Currently, it is an active center organizing Armenological events, conferences in collaboration with different universities, museums, etc. And I want just to show some samples preserved here. Now, this is a purse, silver coin purse, ceramic set made in Kütahya. And Andrei Sevrugian's painting. And the last museum, which this museum is acting like a symbol of my presentation. It was established in Tehran in 2008, based first on private archives, just on private archives. Armenians have settled down in Iran since ancient times, but their number grew bigger here in 1604, 1605, because of the great displacement organized by Shah Abbas from Julfa and Yerevan region. As a result of the displacement, Armenians first settled down in the city of Isfahan, creating the new Julfa quarter, then in Kazvin, Tabriz, Tehran, and elsewhere. Considering the unstable situation in the region, the example of the destruction of the Armenian heritage of Syria, in Tehran was established Artak Manukyan Museum in 2008. The museum is under the control of the Diocesan Council of the Armenian Diocese of Tehran and is considered to be a cultural, anthropological, and religious museum. The museum is one of the most important Armenian cultural centers in Tehran, which present the history and culture of Armenians. One of the main reasons for the creation of the museum was the decrease of the local Armenian community. It is an unwritten law for the families while leaving the country to give the cultural relics of the families to Artak Manukyan Museum. The established tradition is based on the law of the Islamic Republic of Iran, according to which a cultural object older than 100 years is considered to be the property of the country and its export is forbidden. So the collection of museum continues to be replenished until to this day. Among the collections of Artak Manukyan Museum, the manuscript collection stands out, which was also created thanks to donations. It consists of 18 manuscripts. The oldest manuscript in the collection is a 14th century book of rituals. There are also gospel books from 15th century, manuscripts from 16th to 19th centuries as well. The museum is also notable for its collection of thousands of photographs, each of which represent a great historical value. Photos contain a lot of information about the Iranian Armenians with their content and subject. Thus, it is considered a source of study for historians, ethnographers, of course, and art historians. Armenologists and those studies Armenian diasporas can find very interesting information here too. The museum contains a collection of paintings and sculptures. Of course, they are works of Iranian Armenian artists presenting here. The artistic metal collection of the museum is quite large, but not wide in terms of time. It only summarizes examples made in the 19th and 20th centuries. The collection consists of secular and ritual objects. In this case, we are interested in secular objects as the ritual materials were brought here from different Armenian churches of Iran. I would like to refer in particular to a personal archive that recently joined the museum's collection. There was a silversmith in the 20th century called Artsrum Berberian, and her sister donated the master's entire archive to the museum. It includes samples prepared by Artsrum Berberian and documents related to him. Artsrum Berberian is one of the most important silversmiths of Soviet Armenia. He grew up and worked in Iran, later in 1956 repatriated to Armenia. Artsrum Berberian has been engaged in the restoration of traditional Armenian jewelry, started from the Urartian period. Thus, he created a whole movement as a return to traditional national jewelry. The response of his work is evident, especially nowadays, when a huge number of current silversmiths turn to the recreation of traditional national jewelry. However, the basis of all them is the examples restored and developed by Artsrum Berberian. And conclusions. Essentially, regardless of which country or continent a community is located in, the only way to save national culture and art objects is to create local community museums and gather them in one place. Accordingly, museums first of all become centers for preserving the national identity, and only then become places for preserving cultural objects. As ethnographer Dr. Lucine Gushchan notes, when the time distance between memory and homeland increases, then the only way to save that memory is to create an appropriate institution, in this case a community museum. This danger appears already with the second generation living far from the homeland. In Christian countries, intermarriage has led to very rapid assimilation. In Muslim countries, also there is no danger of assimilation. There is a danger of decrease of the community. Thank you for the attention.
We have now 50 minutes for discussion. I don't know, Margareta, how will...
It's okay, we can have a 10-minute discussion first, because the papers were very interesting.
Yes. So I don't know what is the best way, because if speakers could come here, we can move, or what?
No, as usual.
Okay. So, please start with the questions, comments, remarks.
Yes, anyone from Greece, Academy of Arts. Just a question for Mr. Olar. As you showed that the Romanian intellectual Romanescu. He talked about the Black Sarai. Black Sarai used to be the church. Was Panagia Paramithia? Is it St. George, or I think it's Panagia Paramithia, not St. George, or there is a different chapel dedicated to St. George?
It's a chapel.
It's a chapel.
Yes.
And the main church is Panagia Paramithia.
Yes.
That was the main church of the Romanian, of the Phanariot princes and Romanian Phanariot princes in Constantinople since 17th or 17th century. The first were Romanian, and then came the Phanariots. And then at a certain time in 18th century, Black Sarai was given as a donation to Megaspilo Monastery, because the local population was not could not afford to sustain it. So it was a metochion of Megaspilo till 19th century. Romanescu wrote that the Romanians founded Black Sarai and Megaspilion, or he means the metochion of Megaspilion. That's my question. Did he mean the metochion or even the monastery of Megaspilion? He thought that the monastery.
No, the monastery he equated it to the donations. He mentions the donations because the documents that I mentioned at the beginning.
Yes, this is very interesting.
Yes, and we have edited part of them.
The donations to Megaspilion.
Yes.
Since the date that the Black Sarai was donated
yes.
to Megaspilion as a
That's
metochion.
why he gathers them. Yes.
So,
but what's interesting is the fact that you are absolutely right about Black Sarai. But what's interesting is that he considers it to be foundation of the Cantacuzino family.
Yes.
Which is partly correct, but he again considers the Cantacuzino family
yes.
with all its branches as being again Romanian, which is very interesting because, for example, it doesn't make a difference between the Moldavians and Wallachians because there were no Romanians as we understand them in the 19th century.
Yes, Black Sarai was donated to the Wallachians.
Exactly, and yes. we had like Bogdan, which was the Moldavians. They were like kind of at the time they were adults. They had that's why they had like 2 residences. And the Moldavians used the Wallachian residence after their residence is destroyed at the end of the 17th century. But it's interesting how he applies like like early 20th century categories to the 17th and 18th century.
Yes, but I'm a little bit astonished by the fact that he does mention the chapel, St. George Chapel, which was a chapel. He doesn't mention Panagia Parathia, who was a great church. Now it's in ruins because
That's
it's
why
burned down.
like he just mentioned it in passing, but it was the same. Like the part on Bogdan Sarai and on Vlah Sarai, in his case, is based mostly on previous work that was done by others. In the case of Bogdan Sarai and the Romanian architect Balș, again, he has not seen the monument, but they are using Alexander von Millingen, the classical part, they are using Gurlitt. So they are using, that part is less interesting because basically it's from books.
Yes.
There was nothing for him to see the remaining, so he just mentions them and then he switches to Method Panayotaf and the remaining ones.
But at the later time, Panagia Paramithia was mentioned just as Vlah Sarai. Even the Greeks of Constantinople used to call it Vlah Sarai, the church of Panagia Paramithia.
Yes, you're right. But he just goes fast through it because there was not much standing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other questions, please, Mr. Time.
I would like to ask Fioralda about one special item here. If I can look at your presentation. I'm very curious about this. There are some Moldavian icons very similar to this one. And I'm curious about what is the origin.
The origin is from Erseka. It's a city close to Corcea, in the southeast of Albania. Corcea city.
And is any inscription on it or?
Yes, they are from this. During this dictatorship, these heroes of they collect this from the churches, and they archives them by writing under the icons, behind the icons, writing the origin and the dimensions and everything about what we possess for this icon. He has no artist, has no name of iconographer, but we know that it's from the 16th to 17th century and originates from the Postena village in Erseka.
So here is not any inscription.
No, it's only the life, the sacrifices of Holy Friday, and there is no inscription. And it's one of the most beautiful icons. It's very interesting.
I will show you some analysis with this very key. Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Thank you, and when we start again,
Now past 2.
half past 2.